Our gospel reading from Luke this morning that I read to you just a few moments ago doesn't really feel helpful at first. Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor, and blessed are the hungry, and blessed are those who weep." This especially seems out of place this week, when 42 million people have lost their SNAP benefits, and when Christians throughout the world are gathering to remember those who have died in the last year. Blessed are the poor, blessed are the hungry, blessed are the weeping. Jesus must be mistaken. For someone to qualify as #blessed, it has to be something really great. Starbucks gave me a venti instead of a grande, #blessed. My flight has free Wi-Fi, #blessed. That's how it's supposed to work, Jesus. I've never seen anyone post "really weeping today," #blessed. Sometimes it feels like Jesus doesn't know what he's doing, especially when you're the one weeping, or lost, or exhausted by life. You pray for a cure that doesn't come, or you plead for a relationship to be healed and it only breaks more deeply. In those moments, it starts to seem like we know better than God. And then Jesus goes and says things like, "Love your enemies," which almost feels cruel, because when you're poor or hungry or grieving, it can seem like God is the enemy. Distant, unresponsive, unfair. And yet, Jesus says that when people hate you and exclude you, that whenever you find yourself in a moment where you are no longer able to hold your life together, that's when you're blessed. That's where God is. Which really just means that sooner or later, every one of us ends up among the poor and the weeping. Because grief comes for all of us eventually. And yet this is the wonder of the gospel. In those moments, God doesn't look away. Through Jesus, God enters the ache of the world, bearing it from inside out. When we expect absence, God gives presence. When we expect silence, God speaks compassion. This is why Jesus says those confusing things about being blessed, because he's urging us to see that God's ways are not the world's ways. In fact, God has promised to show us specifically in those moments when everything else seems hopeless. And that's the message that we're attempting to embody here today. All Saints Sunday invites us to walk straight into the sorrow by speaking the names of the departed and lighting a candle and offering a prayer. We give our grief shape and dare to hand it back to God. And what our choir and the orchestra are doing this morning shows us how music can hold what words cannot. This requiem is a beautiful example of the ways that music can transform ugliness into a space where we sense God's presence. That's exactly what Jesus himself does from the cross. According to Luke's gospel, one of the last things he said was, "Into your hands I commend my spirit." And I learned this week that that line is taken from Psalm 31, which is an evening song of lament. In this moment of utter abandonment and hopelessness and suffering, as Jesus was staring death in the face, I wonder if we should picture him singing. He was taking all the world's sorrow unto himself, and in that song of lament, death itself began to come undone. In Jesus' song, we hear the sound of God's love refusing to be silenced. The truth is, Music has a unique way of redeeming those instances when all other words fail. Our opening hymn this morning, For All the Saints, has shown up in my life at all sorts of times that were truly beyond words. It was the opening hymn at my ordination and the closing hymn at my grandfather's funeral. And the other seismic moment I've had with this particular piece of music happened earlier this year. As many of you know, back in February, my mom was put on hospice care, and so I went back to my hometown in upstate New York to be with her. And shortly after she entered hospice, my dad had his own medical episode that left him hospitalized for weeks. And the awful, heartbreaking truth is that he did not recover in time to return home and say goodbye. And so the morning that my mother passed away, I went to the hospital to tell my dad that his wife of 46 years had died. After delivering that kind of news, there are no right words to say. So we sang all 8 verses of For All the Saints right there in the hospital room. I guess sometimes that's what faith looks like. It's not solutions or certainty. It's just a song you sing when nothing else makes sense. And then somehow, in ways you can't explain, God meets you in your lament. Because as I told you earlier, on the cross, Jesus already sang that song of lament for us. And the truly beautiful part about our faith is that when we start to believe that God really is meeting us in sorrow and somehow bringing blessing out of it, it's not just your grief that gets transformed, but it's your entire heart. Because when we allow God's presence into our suffering to transform us, Christ's melody of mercy starts to echo through all that we do. That's what it means to love your enemies and to turn the other cheek. The mercy that sang through Christ now sings through us. It sings through those who keep showing up with casseroles and compassion when grief has no words. It sings through those who refuse to let neighbors go hungry and who speak up when systems fail and benefits vanish. It sings through every act of mercy that insists despair does not get the last verse. Blessed are all of those who stand among the grieving and dare to keep the song going. Because in you, through you, the crucified and risen Christ is still at work, composing the next verse of the song that has no end. Amen.